Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to yet another very, very engaging conversation. When you're sitting with people who are forever obsessed with the greater interest of Bharat, it always promises to be an engaging conversation. Well, he broke bounds when and opened our eyes with Breaking India 1, and then Snakes in the Ganga, Breaking India 2.0 came through. So we're in conversation yet again with Rajiv Malhotra Ji, and this time around, the co-author Vijaya Ji has also decided to sit with us. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And you people seem to be, namaste as I say, on a roll. They had one big book with 22 chapters, more than 225,000 words, that's Snakes in the Ganga. And after that come these four books, Varna, Jati and Caste. We have 10 Heads of Ravana, The Power of Future Machines, and then of course the Battle for the IITs. So that's the fourth book. First, let me ask you, Rajiv Ji, how has Snakes in the Ganga done?
Well, first, thank you for having me, and namaste to all the viewers. So, Snakes in the Ganga has done exceptionally well. We've gone after the India tour, where we were here with you. We went to Canada. We had huge following, 5 days, huge events. Bay Area, then New Jersey, and so on. So, it has taken traction. The traction is in India, it's with policymakers, and also a lot of mass awareness. In the United States, the biggest traction has been with the IIT people and the Silicon Valley technocrats, because they feel they've woken up to the fact that they've been under attack and they didn't want to deal with it. You know how you duck and maybe it'll go away, but now you cannot avoid the problem, it's getting worse. So one of the sequels to the book, Snakes in the Ganga, is Battle for IIT. And the Battle for IITs, those guys are really waiting for it. It hasn't reached the US yet. It will in a matter of time. So that's been the reaction and the interest in helping us move this forward.
One of your abilities has been to preempt. So a lot of what you predicted ends up happening 4-5 years later. Do you believe more of Bharat is reactionary than proactive? So when you're a little ahead of the curve or a little ahead of times, Vijayaji, you tend to be met with, okay, you're saying it, but it's not happening around me right now.
Yeah, definitely Indians are very reactive, but the reaction time is getting shorter and shorter because we live in a global society and information travels fast. So one has to ask what these terms actually mean. You know, what is diversity? What is equity? What is inclusion? Because on the surface of it, it all sounds great and we are all for it. Nobody wants anybody to be discriminated. Everybody wants everybody to be included. But is there reverse discrimination? Do we achieve diversity through active discrimination of what some people consider privileged classes or castes? So we have to ask these questions. So to go into the definitions of what these things mean, because Hindus are in peril right now.
Back to your earlier question you asked, Vijaya, on reactiveness. So I do want to say that the first Breaking India book, which is over a dozen years old, coined this idea of Afro-Dalits as a new identity which is shaping. And I've done this based on research in the United States that the church and the Marxists are promoting this idea that the Dalits are African brothers. And there is this Afro-Dalit bhai kind of a thing. And the Dalits are the blacks of India. This was an idea way back. And we wrote it in that book, but people thought it's kind of, come on, that's not going to happen. It's sort of far-fetched. But that is at the heart of this new thing. There is the critical race theory, which is about blacks being oppressed by whites. That's an American context. We don't have any such thing of blacks and whites in India and racism and so on. But they've mapped the blacks as Dalits. So they've said Dalits are the blacks of India and the non-Dalits are the whites of India. So this Afro-Dalit idea, that's how proactive we were a dozen years ago. But now our people are reacting to it. And even as recently as a few months ago when we introduced Snakes in the Ganga, the corporate sector, the Infosys of the world, and a lot of these billionaires who are funding Harvard, funding this kind of wokeism, didn't take it seriously. But now it's going to come right at their doorstep. You will see these new laws being enacted in the United States, like when the Seattle law will be replicated in at least 100 cities in the United States within 12 months.
Wow.
And it's going to be in the EU. EU has a African Dalit movement group, and they are championing that. You will see it in World Bank. World Bank is now having training workshops from the same people in the United States who spread all this stuff. And the training is to give kind of knowledge about caste system in India, only singling out India, no other bias system elsewhere, like in China or elsewhere. And the purpose is to sensitize those who approve loans and financing to see if when they lend money somewhere, will it go to a casteist enterprise? Are there enough Dalits in the project before they give money? So now you'll see the international lending organizations will start putting caste requirements. This is so serious for India.
So how do we sort this? Because and why is this being allowed? Why are organizations also blinking? Organizations are also at a loss to explain why a certain person is a CEO. Was that person made CEO or head of the company based on their surname or their caste or jati or varna, or because of their ability or intelligence? So, like you said, isn't it reverse discrimination? Rajivji and then Vijayji.
Yeah. So basically the theory they're promoting is that you as an individual, so Anand as an individual is a nice guy and we have nothing against him that we can say. But he's born in a certain tradition, and by virtue of being born in that tradition, he gets benefits because that tradition, his ancestry, are the ones who created structures. They created the IIT system, for example. That's the claim, that it was created by Brahmins to oppress Dalits. So even if you are not an oppressor individually, but you are born in the wrong system, if you will. So it's discrimination on grounds of your birth, which is very strange. So I am a person born in a certain community, so I carry the baggage of whatever they may have done. And this is the argument that you as an individual may be okay, but by virtue of the identity and the caste or whatever, or now they brought it into religion. The minority religion is considered oppressed. Muslims are part of this oppressed lot. LGBTQ are part of the oppressed lot. So anyone who is sort of underprivileged in their eyes has a gripe against the majority, and the majority ends up as India as a nation state. So the whole thing is about castes and ultimately about India as a nation state. And this is how serious it is.
No, but why only single out India? Then in our country, then Muslims are not a minority. They are 20% of the population. That means the second largest majority. Minority should be other religious denominations like Parsis, so like Sikhs, like Jains, like Buddhists. Vijayaji. So who's building these narratives? And if they're so how do I say, pillared on fallacies, why is it not being broken?
It's very difficult to break it because the far left sociologists have come up with an entire system to address this. So caste is an easy weapon, and they also make it binary. They say the upper caste Brahmins and then there are the Dalits. And this is the only picture that's painted in the US. So the majority of the Hindus are considered upper caste, and then there's the 1% Dalits, on whom they have all these kinds of aggressions. Now, if you look at meritocracy itself, so they have redefined terms. So this is the beauty of the left. So when they say in the US, merit has an adjective called academic merit. As if there are other forms of merit, when you're in an academic situation. So they say merit itself, the idea of merit itself is a patriarchal structure. The merit itself is a sham because it's created by people of privilege so that they and their offsprings do well. So they create a system that is biased based on the so-called merit, which sounds so virtuous, but it's actually not. Even though you have affirmative action or quotas, giving equal opportunities to all, even to the marginalized, but when they come out of the system, the outcome is different. And when the outcome is different, they don't care what the system is. They basically say if the outcome of any system is different and there is variability, then the system itself is biased. We don't even want to analyze any further. So you have an educational institute that's producing, kids that get first class or top the class, and the others who don't do it, and then they enter the job market. They say that is essentially because of bias. It's a structural issue, is what they're saying. So they are redefining words. So inclusion doesn't mean inclusion of everybody. Inclusion means excluding the privileged, and thereby including the others. So it's not equal opportunity. So it is actually reverse discrimination. It is again looking at identities that the left considers valid. Some of them are synthetic identities like gender fluidity and things like that. So they will define which are the identities that need to be propped up and which are the identities that need to be cancelled.
But who is fueling this narrative and why is India being targeted? What is the reason why?
So this is very interesting. India is a target partly because our Dalits have gone there to merge with the underclass and the blacks and the oppressed and forge a unity. So the Indian left is into this, and also a lot of Muslim communities, the Muslim Association, the Indian American Muslim Association in the United States, they are all supporting this. So the left, the Muslims are supporting it, and the irony is that the Indian billionaires are funding it, which we talked about in the previous thing. They should stop funding it. This time when I go around the government, I ask people, have you checked with these billionaires since we talked last? It was a surprise to everybody, but now it shouldn't be. The answer I get is that billionaires are claiming they didn't know their name is being used for all this. But that's difficult to accept. I mean, if you are a Mahindra, you're going there every few months, you're living mostly overseas, and you're having these photo ops with the who's who in Harvard, you got to know what they're doing in your name. If you are a Lakshmi Mittal and the whole center is named after you and your family, you ought to know.
There are two sides to the coin, and there is always a little bit of dirt in the container no matter how much you clean it, or how much I would say. Is this the majority? Is this the bulk of the money? Is it going towards this? Or is this just a byproduct of the larger good that is actually happening? So is Ashoka University only focused on this just because you had a Hanson? I'm just playing, asking you the counter. Just because two professors were part of a particular event, did that event actually work? Did it actually dismantle Hindutva? It didn't. So there will be voices who would want to cry out like this. You have to allow them that space. And you cannot equate India and China because China is very closed, state controlled. Their corporates have the state backing. India is an open market. It's democracy. There will be investments that will come in, and you are planning to set out and set up shop across the world. So you will have to somewhere
but
balance
look at Singapore
the act,
though. Singapore had an MOU with Yale University, 2014 to 24. They were smart. They said a 10-year MOU, we'll try out liberal arts from Yale University. By 2020, they said none of this crap anymore. We do not want social sciences from the West because it's making Singaporean society divisive. And they chopped off this, they said this connection, they said we don't want this anymore. Singapore is better off without a connection with Yale University.
So let's look at your question on Ashoka.
Yeah.
Is it all bad? So they're not doing STEM. They're not a technocrat. They're not bringing advanced technology. So at least they're certainly not doing any good in that sense. So they claim to be liberal arts, social sciences. Now, all the social sciences taught in India are Western social sciences, without exception. When you study sociology, they start with all the European thinkers and all that. They don't have any Indian social thought, as if India never had a social thought. But we have had Dharma Shastras, we had Arthashastras. There are a lot of Shastras in our tradition which talk about society and the values and morals and all of that. Even yoga talks about yam, niyam, these are all ethics. So there's plenty of material that you could create Indian social thought. But none of that is what's being taught. The professors are trained in places like Harvard, or their professors are trained in places like Harvard. So either they're directly or indirectly bringing that kind of ideology into India. So I would say the answer is yes. The vast majority of what they are teaching, whether it's history, whether it's social justice, human rights, gender studies, all these departments that they are teaching there are full of Western ideas and colonial ideas, postmodernist ideas, liberal left-wing ideas, and they're very proud of that. They in fact call themselves the Harvard of India. So they are doing that.
No, but if that is the case, are you going to blame the Harvards? Are you going to blame the corporates? Or are you going to blame the education system in our country, the governments, the NCERT, what are the textbooks that are being spread about? What's being spoken about? 9 years of this government.
Yes.
What has changed? So how
Good
much of
point.
a blame can you blame the corporates or the Western academia?
Absolutely.
If our own academia is pushing this.
Absolutely. In fact, we cannot blame others for ill-treating us if we ill-treat ourselves. If we don't have self-respect, if we haven't come up with our own curriculums to teach through our own drishti, our own lens, what we have to say about ourselves, how can we blame them for kind of bringing their lens to study us? So the vacuum of true, proper social sciences discourse is an India problem. It's a problem within India. HRD ministry, culture ministry, none of them have done anything about it. And, that's really the origin of the problem.
If that is the case, Vijayaji, aren't we ourselves at fault that we have not asked our own corporates to fund projects in our country which bring out our own core knowledge, social sciences from the India point of view? So how do I go back and say, don't do this there? Because they'll turn around and say, there's nothing that's happening here.
No, they could fund, they could initiate projects. But of course, when they associate themselves with the Harvards of the world, they do get clout, they get access to other billionaires, and they increase their network. This book, Varna Jati Caste, that we've put out, is sort of a first step as a defense mechanism. We've given the history of Varna Jati caste, what is the difference between Varna versus Jati versus caste. We also talk about, just think about it, the Indian social structure with all its problems produced the best diversity that the world ever had.
Yeah,
in terms of food, in terms of culture, clothing, practices, worship,
languages,
languages. Unparalleled diversity.
And sustained for thousands of
years. And at a time where India was one of the largest economic powers. It had diversity, and there was no social problems where we had genocide and things like that. Of course, every system has its problems. And we had solutions as well that we came up with.
Correct.
So that needs to be studied. Why, with all this talk of diversity, right? Why don't you look at what system actually produced diversity? There's no other system that produced diversity like how our system has.
Let's come to this book, The 10 Heads of Ravana. That is Rajiv Malhotra and Divya Reddy. You have edited it. So collaborations have happened. So Rajivji, why is it a critique of Hindu-phobic scholars? You very clearly called them Hindu-phobic scholars. So why so?
So, first of all, Ravan is a metaphor. He was a brilliant man, and all these are brilliant people. And the metaphor is that Ravan has been reincarnated as an intellectual. Okay, and so now he's got the 10 personalities. These 10 heads are not figurative. They are the 10 personas, and these are all these people like Ramachandra Guha and Kancha Ilaya and Devdutt Patnaik and Shashi Tharoor and many Americans like Wendy Doniger and Sheldon Pollock and so on. Now these are brilliant people, and in their own world they are very highly thought of, like Ravan was, have a lot of following, and so they're not stupid people. But the Hindu society considers them to be inimical to our interests. They are out there criticizing us. Like, for instance, take Shashi Tharoor. Shashi Tharoor's book, while it's called Why I'm a Hindu, it basically says I'm a Hindu, which to him means going inward and being mystical, but does not allow political action, does not allow social action. The outward part of Hinduism, he calls it Hindutva, and he rejects it. Now, the fallacy with that is the whole idea, what is Krishna teaching? He's teaching outward activism.
Correct.
The whole idea of Mahabharata is outward activism. In fact, military action is included. So if this were some new Hindutva, invention to take political action and social action, then you'd have to negate the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, because the Ramayana is also like that. You'd have to negate the entire Dharma Shastras, the entire Artha Shastras, and you'd have to reduce Hindus to people who are just sitting quietly under the ceiling and afraid to give their identity and assert themselves. That would be self-defeating. So in that sense, even a smart, brilliant guy like Shashi Tharoor is acting against the interests of Hindu success in this world, which is a competitive world. And the Kurukshetra today is the global geopolitics is the Kurukshetra. And so we have to be, we should be encouraging people to be intellectual Kshatriyas rather than sort of very docile and domesticated and afraid to speak out. So that's one example, but we have picked 10 of them. And these articles have been written by our young team. We are mentoring a young team of Infinity Foundation scholars. Each of them took one head of Ravana, and this project was started, it was incubated in Rishikesh just before COVID. And so during COVID, they've been working on this. Now they've been told, no disrespect, no hitting below the belt, no insulting to anybody. What you have to do is first read the person that you are going to critique, read all their works, highlight what you think is problematic, give proper references and quotations so that it's all authentic, and give your response. And all of this has been checked out, fact-checked, and reviewed by each other and by outsiders. So we are very proud of this book, and I think we invited all the 10 targets to come at this event. And have a discussion. And none of them showed up. Some of them wrote some very insulting emails that given how great they are, how dare we criticize them? That sort of an attitude. And many of them just simply ignored it. But we've tried to open this conversation.
We don't cancel them.
We are not cancelling them. They're cancelling themselves. And the irony is that when they are talking about our point of view, like this Hindutva conference and anti-Hindutva conference, they never invited us. We try to get in, but we're not allowed. So when they are talking about us, we are cancelled. We're not allowed to speak. But when we are talking about them, we invited them.
So you are not only opening up a lot of fronts, not one but 10. Each of them are individuals who are brilliant, like you said, who've got a huge following, like you said, and they have established themselves in the academia, and you are opening yourself up to all of them. So you're also opening yourself to a lot of not just criticism, cancelling, but also ridicule. So why are you doing this?
I think the truth essentially shines. In social sciences, you have, the language is very dense and they have all these fluffy language, and so to go through all of that, right, is actually a cover, or, to show that they have academic rigor. That's a false sort of facade. Now, the people that have criticized these people are all basically STEM educated. There's an astrophysicist, there is a computer scientist, another engineer. And so we just look for truth and objective reality. I mean, we just look at, good, rational ways to argue with these people. So it's a very, very good entertaining read, because it simplifies the scholarship, A, and number two, it gives a response that, people with common sense can understand.
You're challenging a lot of bulwarks. You're also challenging a lot of established norms and thought processes. How has it been responded to so far? The IITs, are they open to this? Corporates, are they open to this? The government, policy makers, those who are trying to create a particular discourse about Bharat, are they open to this?
So let's take them one by one. So I would say that the scholars themselves have yet to kind of respond to us. So maybe they're going to respond in some way. The corporates are silent. Corporates are silent, but we have heard through other sources, people who've approached them, that they are pretending or claiming that they didn't know too much about what's happening in their name. They just gave this money and, they have to now check it out. So at least they're going to become aware that there's public pressure and they cannot just hide behind public pressure. As far as the government and other authorities are concerned, what I detect from my last trip, when they were not aware of all these things happening, to this trip, few months later, they are not only aware, but they are checking it out. They are trying to do some, trying to keep an eye on these things. So I think they have been woken up, and it remains to be seen how active they'll be. But we want them to be not reactive. I don't want to be coming back every 6 months and giving them the next dose. They have to be proactive. They have to have think tanks, and they don't have such a situation. And the gurus are sleeping. I mean, they are the keepers. They have the credibility. They have money. They have lakhs of followers. But they are just teaching their own little, very limited curriculum, and they're not going out of their shell because maybe they don't want to do anything controversial. So that's sort of how we're feeling.
Nobody wants to poke the bear.
No, that is correct. So, we are doing it. It's not popularity oriented. It's sort of like a seva that we are doing, because somebody has to shake it up. And people say you're doing something controversial, and I say, if it is controversial because we are shaking up the established norms, that's a good controversy. Einstein was controversial because he overthrew the Newtonian laws of physics. Jesus Christ was very controversial. In fact, he was so controversial they killed him because he was an unarmed man, a peaceful man, but just because what he said was so provocative that they had to kill him. So he was a controversial guy. And Gandhi was very controversial. So provoking the established view, challenging it, is not a bad thing because the intentions are good. It's peaceful and it's for more intellectual discourse, and we're not harming anybody.
As long as it is based on fact and not rhetoric.
Right.
Yes.
And if the people can keep adding pressure, now we've done the initial work. If the listeners of this program, they start putting pressure from the Supreme Court Justice to the government departments to the corporations, that would keep the momentum going.
Always a pleasure speaking with the two of you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.